Love, when it finds you, doesn't ask questions, it just pulls. But what happens when the past finally catches up and love turns out to be the most dangerous kind of mistake? A connection hidden by years of silence, secrets buried so deep they nearly erase the truth. In the tangled web of relationships and fate, sometimes the greatest love becomes the most regrettable mistake. And when the past refuses to stay buried, everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and identity begins to unravel. The rain fell like shards of glass, slicing through the silence that cloaked London's streets. Street lamps cast fractured halos in the puddles, and the air was thick with the electric tension of something about to break. Elliot stood alone outside the flat in Harrow, the cigarette's ember the only flicker of warmth on a night heavy with secrets. Tonight, everything was about to change. A hidden truth, buried for decades, was clawing its way to the surface. A truth that could unravel love, blood, and the very meaning of family. Somewhere in the shadows, a ghost lay buried, and Elliot's fiancée was about to invoke it. Behind him, the city hummed with life. Sirens wailed somewhere far off. Laughter flickered and faded in the mouth of a passing alley. Footsteps clicked with the urgency of strangers going nowhere. But Elliot felt none of it. Silence clung to him. Not the absence of sound, but the kind that settles in your chest when truth is near, and you don't know if it will save you or swallow you whole. Inside the flat, Amanda stood at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a bunch of fresh peonies. Soft, blushing flowers she had always loved without quite knowing why. She arranged the peonies with quiet precision, her hands trembling with something deeper than nerves. Every petal felt like a question she'd never been allowed to ask. The polished glass vase caught the overhead light like sun on marble, casting glimmers across the room like scattered memories. She barely noticed the flowers anymore. Her heart was elsewhere, caught in the echo of a name spoken just days before. A name she hadn't expected, a name that cracked open the silence of her childhood like thunder splitting the sky. Thomas Bernard. She said it again in her mind, tasting it like the edge of a knife. Could it be him? After all these years, the absent face in every childhood photo, the ghost her mother never named. Amanda's hands trembled as she poured water into the vase. A few drops escaped, striking the counter like tiny ripples of her nerves. She had spent her life learning to live without answers. Her mother had offered none, only fragments, riddles, a cold wall of silence where a father's story should have been. He wasn't around, she'd say, then change the subject. Not your real dad, she'd add, as if to erase whatever image Amanda had dared to imagine. So Amanda built her life without him. She became her own foundation, independent, driven, careful not to ask too much of anyone, even Elliot, especially Elliot. But now, with her wedding just over a month away, the questions she had so carefully buried were rising like a tide, insistent, unrelenting, impossible to ignore. How could she walk down that aisle, take vows, build a family, when a piece of her own was still missing? Every little girl dreams of her father walking her down the aisle. Amanda had told herself she didn't need that dream. The ache of absence had dulled, but now it pressed sharp again, low and real. She pressed a damp palm to her stomach, breathing in the silence of the flat. The living room smelled of fresh flowers, lavender air freshener, and the faint, comforting traces of their mingled perfumes. Echoes of a life she had built with Elliot, a life that felt unshakable. Their love was a spark struck in a dark place, a nightclub in Watford 6 years ago. He hadn't planned to go out that night. The club was loud, overcrowded, and not the kind of place he usually enjoyed. But something in the air felt electric, like the night itself was holding its breath. Then he saw her, Amanda. She moved through the crowd like she owned it, radiant, self-assured, magnetic. She was stunning, curvaceous, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman men tripped over themselves to impress. But there was something quieter beneath her confidence, something he recognized in himself, a kind of stillness. She wasn't the type to fall for just anyone. Her tastes were clear: tall, dark, handsome. Elliot, soft-spoken and mixed race, didn't fit the mold. But still, her eyes lingered. When he offered her a drink, she surprised them both by saying yes. They talked, danced, laughed, and something unfamiliar unfolded. Not just attraction, but connection. A strange comfort, like he'd known her in some other life. They exchanged numbers before she left, and to his quiet disbelief, she messaged first the next morning. Just a simple line, but everything in it said, "I felt it too." What followed moved fast, but never rushed. Text turned to voice notes to long, late-night calls. Soon they were sharing everything: stories, dreams, fears. Their lives became intertwined. He could feel it happening, this deep merging of two souls neither of them had planned for. Amanda wasn't just beautiful. She saw him. She made space for him. And in her, he found something he didn't know he was missing: a place to rest. Their courtship bloomed quietly, like flowers in shadow, unforced, natural, right. Looking back, Elliot sometimes wondered if it had been fate, if the universe had pulled them together with an invisible thread. But fate, he would learn, was never so simple. Because love, even the real kind, isn't immune to the truths that lie buried in silence. He always said that. "You look like you were dreaming with your eyes open," he'd once whispered, brushing a curl from her cheek in the early blush of dawn. They fell in love fast. They moved in faster. Their flat became a sanctuary and a home, filled with a collection of Studio One records, candle wax, burnt toast and laughter, mornings tangled in sheets, and arguments that flared and faded like struck matches. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was real. There was music and art, compromise and comfort. They knew how to fight, but more importantly, they knew how to come back. With each quarrel came tenderness, with each silence, a hand reaching out. They were compatible and like-minded. It wasn't just romance. It was a quiet architecture, the building of something rare, fierce, and undeniably theirs. A bond rooted not just in desire, but in understanding. Not perfect, but genuine. The kind of love that didn't just grow, it anchored. And when she told him she was pregnant, his face crumpled with joy. Not a surprise, not fear, joy. The kind that pulled her to him like gravity. Jordan came screaming into the world with her curls and Elliot's steady, searching eyes. A perfect reflection of them both. And now, the most delicate reason to hold their world together. But Amanda couldn't ignore the shadow anymore. Outside, Elliot gazed up at their window, his thoughts racing like traffic on a restless night. The phone buzzed again in his hand. Susan's name shone on the screen, steady and unyielding. He couldn't bring himself to answer. Not yet. He flicked the cigarette away, its ember briefly trailing through the cold air. His breath fogged the night like a secret trying to escape. While Elliot lingered outside, ignoring his mother's calls, Amanda remained inside, consumed by the longing to connect with her long-lost father. Through the digital reach of social media and the scattered recollections of a few of her late mother's old acquaintances, Amanda finally found him, the man whose absence had carved a silent void in her life. Thomas Bernard, her father, a man in his late 50s, living quietly in Portland, Jamaica. An artist by profession, semi-retired, he is known not only for capturing the lush contours of the Blue Mountains or the sunlit stillness of fishing boats in Port Antonio, but also for something more personal. He sketched faces he'd never met, lovers he'd never touched, moments that never actually occurred. Some said he was haunted. Others believed he was remembering. But Thomas always maintained, some images find you before the memories do. It started with a message, cautious, formal, trembling on the edge of hope. When the message arrived, Thomas glanced at the screen, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. Amanda. The name stirred something deep, something long buried. But after all these years, after the silence, the distance, the years of lost opportunities, he wasn't sure he was ready. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart pounding, mind racing. Was this real or just a cruel trick? A stranger seeking attention. He didn't want to hope. Hope was dangerous. So he typed back, the words cold and sharp, a shield against the fragile thread of possibility. I don't have time for pranksters. He hit send before his doubts could surface, before his heart could betray him. But as the message vanished into the vast digital world, a heavy silence descended over him, thick and unyielding. The prank, the lie, the denial. It was all a desperate act to protect himself from a pain he wasn't sure he could bear. Thomas gripped his paintbrush, eyes closed, haunted by the echo of a daughter he might never truly know. Thomas's phone buzzed again. Another message. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen, then reluctantly accepted the incoming video call. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, Amanda. Not a prank, not a joke. Her eyes held the same cautious hope he felt but tried to hide. In that instant, the air between them tightened, thick with things neither dared to say. "Hello," she said softly, her voice trembling at the edges but holding steady. "I'm Amanda." Thomas's throat tightened. This wasn't a prank. This was real. He stared, the name hitting him like a thunderclap. Amanda. He breathed, as if tasting the word for the first time in decades. She felt the tightness in her throat tighten further, strange and bitter, to hear your own name spoken by a man who should have known it all along. "Yes," she whispered. "Amanda, your daughter." The revelation slammed into him like a tidal wave, fracturing the silence into memories. Laughter lost, moments missed, a lifetime stolen. "My daughter," his voice cracked, disbelief twisting every syllable. "Yes," she said firmly. "Florence, your Florence. She was my mother. You remember her?" His throat tightened as the past clawed its way back. "Florence," he murmured, pain raw in the single word. A storm of emotions battered him. Guilt, sorrow, anger at himself, all crashing in violent waves. He struggled for breath, for words. "How is she?" he finally managed, the old habit slipping out without thought. Amanda swallowed hard, eyes glistening with tears she fought to hold back. "She died 2 years ago. Cancer." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Thomas's breath hitched, his hand trembling as it covered his mouth. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice breaking under the weight of what should have been years ago. It's okay," Amanda said, her voice breaking. "I've learned to live with her absence, the same way I've learned to live without a father." The silence that fell between them was suffocating, a chasm built from decades of secrets and silence. Thomas's eyes filled with tears, glistening like slivers of regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, barely able to meet her gaze. "Amanda," he said, his voice trembling with a fragile, desperate hope. "I know it must have taken everything you had to reach out to me. I'm sorry for not being there, for failing you as a father. I can't change the past, but I'm truly grateful you called. Maybe this is a chance, a small one, to begin to make things right, to finally get to know each other." Amanda's breath seized, her heart hammering in her chest. For a long moment, she remained silent, caught between the pain of past scars and the delicate thread of hope his words had woven. Then, with a voice just above a whisper, she responded, "I've waited so long to hear you say that. Maybe this is a beginning." Her eyes shimmered, the weight of years pressing down. Yet something lighter, something new, stirred beneath. A lifetime of mistakes, a legacy of absence, weighed heavily on Thomas's conscience. His eyes shone with fierce regret and aching hope that the past might still be rewritten. They talked for hours that first night, initially cautious, then with surprising ease. He shared stories of his paintings, the tranquility of the Blue Lagoon, exciting rafting trips on the Rio Grande, and the inspiration he drew from the beauty of Portland. She opened up about Jordan, Elliot, and the wedding looming on the horizon. Pride warmed Thomas's chest as Amanda shared that she was a pediatrician, and Elliot, a graphic designer. He laughed when she spoke of Elliot's devotion to the deep grooves of ska, the sway of rocksteady, the velvet pulse of lovers rock, and the soul of old reggae. While he works, he loses himself in the golden voices of Alton Ellis, Gregory Isaacs, and Dennis Brown. Each note a bomb, each beat a rhythm he knows by heart. Thomas, too, was swept up in those timeless rhythms, the oldies but goodies. He and Elliot moved to the same beat, their musical tastes harmonizing like a well-loved song. "I think I'll like him," he said with a grin. 2 weeks later, Thomas arrived at London Gatwick. The sky was overcast, rain threatening, but Amanda's heart pounded like summer thunder. She and Elliot stood at arrivals, watching strangers spill through the gate. Then there he was, slower than she imagined, taller too, a duffel bag in hand. Their eyes met, a beat of stillness. No music, no speeches, just breath and blood and disbelief. She stepped forward, so did he. For a moment, it was awkward. Too many years pressed into one meeting. A hug would have felt like too much. A handshake, not enough. So they simply stood close, sharing a silence more intimate than words. Elliot broke the tension with a smile. "You must be Thomas." Thomas turned to him. "You must be the man my daughter chose," he said. Then after a moment added, "Smart girl." Elliot's physique was impossible to miss. "They say a man often chooses a woman like his mom," Thomas joked. "But Amanda, you went for a man who stands just like a younger version of me. Tall, handsome, and bandy-legged." They all chuckled. Elliot pointed at Amanda with a grin. "She's bow-legged too." Laughter bubbled up between them, warm and easy as the afternoon air. "Guess we're all a little crooked," Amanda teased, nudging Elliot gently. "Crooked but perfectly aligned," Thomas added with a smile. They strolled toward the car park, their laughter feeding into comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from shared humor and unspoken understanding. On the drive from Gatwick, the tension began to ease, and laughter slowly found its way in, soft at first, then growing freer with each passing mile. Thomas asked about the racial tension, about Jordan, about the wedding details, how many guests, what color the flowers were, who was walking Amanda down the aisle. When they reached Wembley, Amanda's breath caught again. Thomas's sister, her aunt, was waiting by the door, eyes wide with disbelief and love. Inside, Amanda met cousins she never knew she had. One looked so much like her. It knocked the air from her lungs. Elliot stood beside her the whole time, his hand never leaving hers, a quiet anchor in the storm. As they drove home that late afternoon, Amanda stared out the window at the city she thought she knew. It all looked different now, warmer somehow, wider. "What are you thinking?" Elliot asked, glancing at her in the passenger seat. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I'm thinking I didn't even know I was missing something. And now, I can't believe I ever lived without it." Elliot reached for her hand. She took it. In the days leading up to the wedding, Thomas became more than just a guest. Elliot had picked him up a few times from Wembley, bringing him back to their flat for long dinners, late-night sessions filled with Jamaican oldies but goodies, and hours spent flipping through worn photo albums. Jordan climbed onto his lap as if no time had ever been lost. And somewhere in that space between shared meals and quiet conversations, something sacred settled. Thomas began to call Elliot my son. At first, Elliot hesitated. The words landed heavy, unexpected, but eventually, He said it back, not out of obligation, but from a place of quiet honor. Dad. A single word, one syllable to acknowledge the man who had filled a space Elliot himself never thought he needed filled. The evening he knelt before Amanda, it wasn't just a proposal. It was a quiet rebellion against the ghost of his past. He wasn't only asking to be her husband, he was making a vow, raw and trembling, to be the kind of father he had never known. To Jordan, to the children they dreamed of, to the family they were trying to build out of broken history and fragile hope. Dad. The word had always felt like a locked door, but that night, as he held out the ring with a hand that shook only slightly, Elliot wasn't just offering love. He was offering legacy. He was breaking the cycle, choosing presence over absence, truth over silence. A man finally standing where a father should. Susan stood alone at her kitchen window, sipping lukewarm tea. Her son's wedding invitation rested on the counter like a ticking bomb. She traced his name with her finger, Elliot Thomas Clark. She had given him his father's name, not out of forgiveness, but because part of her had never truly let go. She told herself it was for closure, but the truth was simpler. She had never stopped loving that foolish man from Brixton who vanished like steam from a kettle. And now it was too late. Or maybe it wasn't. The day to solemnly make his vows before God and men had finally arrived. Elliot stood at the altar, his heart pounding under the weight of his tailored suit, eyes fixed on the church doors, waiting for the moment that would change everything. Surrounded by friends and family, flowers and sacred silence, he waited, not just for a bride, but for the future to begin. Each second stretched like a thread through a needle's eye. He wasn't just waiting to seal vows before God and men. He was waiting to prove that love, when built on truth and sacrifice, could stand. The faces before him blurred, a sea of expectation and joy. But his focus never wavered. He could still hear Jordan's giggle that morning, still feel Amanda's fingers brushed his cheek as they parted for the ceremony. She was coming, and with her, the life they had fought for, raw, imperfect, and real. He took a breath, steady and full. Today wasn't just a wedding, it was a reckoning, a redemption, and he was ready. Amanda appeared at the top of the aisle, framed by colored light filtering through the stained glass. Her dress was simple, elegant, a gentle shimmer in the dim cathedral glow, but it was her face that held the room. Composed, luminous, as though every answer she'd ever needed had finally settled into her skin. And beside her, arm in arm, was Thomas Bernard. His steps were careful, measured, a man both proud and humbled, his hand steady on his daughter's. There was a ripple of whispers as they began their walk, a few gasps, the shifting of shoulders, the quick hush of astonishment, but most of the church was too captivated to speak. Until someone did, a sharp, audible inhale. Susan, Elliot's mother, stood in the second pew, frozen, as if rooted to the ground by something ancient and immovable. Her eyes locked onto Thomas's with an intensity that spoke volumes. Not curiosity, but shock. A wound torn open without warning. A tremor passed through her. The blood drained from her face. She steeled herself, raising emotion like a shield against the avalanche she'd spent decades outrunning. Elliot blinked, confused, instinctively motioning for her to sit, but she didn't move. She couldn't. At the front of the aisle, Amanda hesitated, sensing the disruption. Thomas turned and gave her a small nod, reassuring, but hollow. His eyes flicked briefly toward Elliot. Outside, the rain intensified, pelting the church's stone walls, as if nature itself were trying to intervene. Then came the moment that changed everything. Thomas's breath caught. Susan's eyes met his, and in that glance, everything collapsed. Guilt, memory, regret. Her lips parted, trembling, but no words came. The tears in her eyes weren't just sorrow. They were history. Thomas stood stiffly beside Amanda, his expression flickering. Years of silence pressed against his chest. A lifetime of unspoken truths echoed loudly in the hush. The priest cleared his throat, a soft sound that barely touched the silence. The church held its breath, as though time itself had paused. Then Susan stood taller, not dramatically, but slowly, pulled upward by something inevitable. Her composure crumbled. Her voice came like a crack in the stained glass stillness. "Thomas," she said, barely a whisper. Amanda froze. The bouquet trembled in her hands. A ripple passed through the congregation. Heads turned, hearts pounded. Thomas turned fully now, slowly, as though every step carried a century. His hand slipped from Amanda's arm. His eyes met Susan's. He already knew what she was going to say, but the words still pierced like lightning. Am I seeing a ghost, or the man who ran away from his responsibilities? The silence that followed was deafening. In that silence, it was clear. The past had arrived, uninvited, unstoppable, and nothing, not love, not ceremony, not prayer, could stop the truth from demanding to be spoken. A stunned murmur rolled through the pews. Amanda's eyes darted between them. "Dad," she whispered, tugging gently at his arm. Do you two know each other?" But Thomas didn't answer. His gaze was locked on Susan, lips parted slightly, like a man recalling a name he'd sworn to forget. "Susan," he breathed, a sound more prayer than word. Elliot, still standing at the altar, felt the ground shift beneath him. It was like falling through a trapdoor in slow motion. That moment just before impact, when your body knows something is wrong, but your mind hasn't caught up. His mother's voice echoed through the vaulted ceiling, but it wasn't slurred. It wasn't rambling. This wasn't one of her drunken outbursts. He'd spoken to her barely 20 minutes ago. Her breath was clean. Her words were clear. This was something else. He looked at her now, trembling, eyes wide, and beneath it all, something deeper, knowing. He turned back toward Amanda, but the look on her face sent his heart into freefall. She stared between Thomas and Susan, confusion folding into horror. "Wait, what is this? What's going on?" Thomas stumbled forward, drawing Amanda with him. His voice caught like gravel. I didn't expect to see you here." His voice cracked, barely a whisper. His eyes stayed locked on Susan. She stepped forward. Her hands trembled at her sides. "Neither did I," she said, voice raw. "You left, Thomas. No call, no letter. I waited until I couldn't anymore." A hush rippled through the room. Amanda blinked, stricken. "Mom?" she whispered. Susan turned slowly, weighted by her own words. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes shining. "If he's your father, this wedding can't happen." Gasps echoed through the pews. Footsteps approached. Elliot, breathless, urgent. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, eyes flicking between his mother and Amanda. Susan's breath caught. She stood, not with drama, but like a woman rising to face a tide she'd held back for decades. "Thomas," she said softly. No accusation, just a name, brittle with memory. The church held its breath. Thomas turned slowly, like the name alone had reached deep into him. Amanda's steps faltered. "Dad?" Susan's eyes met Amanda's, then Elliot's. She didn't cry. Her voice barely reached above a whisper. "You should have known," she said to Thomas. "You should have known the moment you saw him." A pause. His walk, his hands, that damn music. Thomas staggered. A hush swept the pews like wind through reeds. "What are you saying?" Amanda asked, voice cracking. Susan closed her eyes, as if bracing for thunder. "Elliot's yours," she said finally. "He's your son." The room spun. Amanda turned to Elliot, her fiancé, the father of her child, her heart gripped by dread. "No, that's not possible," she whispered. "He's my father." Thomas stepped forward. "I never knew Susan was pregnant," he said. "I left I never knew about Elliot. Silence swallowed the room. A chair scraped softly as someone sat, the sound faint and uneasy. Outside, the rain hammered harder against the windows, as if trying to wash away the weight of the moment. Amanda looked at Elliot and saw a stranger. Elliot looked at Amanda and saw his own reflection in her eyes, the reflection of something broken, impossible to mend. Their wedding day fractured in the stillness of the sanctuary. Amanda stood frozen, caught between the jagged remains of her family, teetering on the edge between bitterness and fragile hope. Outside, the storm raged. Thomas's knees buckled, his soul bent under regret. Susan pointed toward Elliot, voice trembling but fierce. This is his child. The one I told him was his, the one he denied. A new wave of gasps swept the room. Faces turned to Amanda and Elliot, horrified. Amanda clutched Elliot's hand. A lifeline. I never slept with anyone else, Susan said, stepping forward, her voice cold and cutting. Because of him, the children, siblings fell in love, had a child, and were about to be wed. Her breath came in sharp huffs, like a woman unraveling after holding on for far too long. The church was deathly silent, the weight of the revelation hanging thick in the air. Faces pale, whispers caught in throats. Amanda's eyes welled with tears as the full horror of the truth began to settle. Elliot's jaw clenched tightly, fighting the shock, the betrayal, the impossible reality staring him down. Thomas stood frozen, haunted by the past he had never truly escaped. Susan's chest rose and fell violently. I warned you, she said bitterly. I told you what would happen. Thomas's legs gave way beneath him, and before anyone could react, he crumpled to the floor, pulling Amanda down with him. Elliot lunged forward, desperate to catch him, but Thomas slipped through his grasp like smoke, collapsing in a heavy heap. Someone call an ambulance. Amanda's voice cracked, sharp and urgent, as the wedding party rushed to their aid, gathering quickly in the nearby aisle. The church, once filled with whispered shock and stunned silence, now buzzed with frantic movement. Within 15 tense minutes, medics arrived, swiftly assessing Thomas's unresponsive form before rushing him out through the side door, the heavy sound of their footsteps fading into the distance. As the wedding was officially called off, the guests began to disperse, the air thick with disbelief and heartbreak. Amanda's sister instinctively took Jordan with her, protecting the child from a truth too heavy for innocence to bear. Elliot and Amanda sat together near the altar, the place where they should have stood to take their vows. Beyond the stained glass, the city's distant noise rose in a dull, indifferent roar. Amanda's voice was barely a whisper. Why couldn't someone tell us this before today? Elliot shook his head slowly, voice raw and heavy. My mom never mentioned anything about my dad, my nan, her friends, relatives. They all told her it was better this way. I didn't know. Amanda swallowed hard, eyes shimmering. But we're siblings. We have Jordan. What now? Elliot reached for her hand, fingers curling gently around hers. We stay together. We face it, no matter what. Outside, London's endless drizzle softened into a gentle mist, as if the city itself was giving them space to breathe, to mourn, to begin again. And in the fragile stillness between them, two souls bound by blood and love vowed to rewrite their story. Together, Elliot and Amanda slipped away from the lingering whispers and shattered expectations, finding refuge in a dimly lit corner of an old pub near Covent Garden. The muffled chatter of well-wishers and the clinking of glasses faded behind the storm, raging in their hearts. How could Mom keep this from me all these years? Elliot's voice cracked, raw and vulnerable. I grew up believing Vincent was my dad, a man who barely looked at me. And you. I never knew our father wasn't here in London, but thousands of miles away in Jamaica. Amanda's fingers tightened around her glass of brandy. My mom never spoke of Thomas. Always said he left before I was born. But now I wonder if it was fate, that somehow we were meant to meet, to fall in love, without ever realizing we were brother and sister. The weight of the revelation stretched between them like the London fog, dense, heavy, suffocating. Neither knew how to breathe through it. The pub's warmth wrapped around them, but inside, the chill of a shattered past seeped deep. Amanda looked down at her glass. How do we even talk about this? Elliot's voice cracked. I don't know, but I'm not letting go. Not of you, not of Jordan. He reached across the table, his hand finding hers. We face it, together, no matter how impossible it feels. For a long moment, they sat in silence. Two souls bound by love and blood, adrift in a world suddenly turned upside down. Outside, the rain had finally eased, leaving the city washed clean, as if waiting for them to find their own way forward. Susan sat alone in her cramped Hackney flat, the wallpaper peeling like the secret she had buried for decades. Her gaze fixed on the cracked wall, a silent witness to a truth too fragile to speak, one that could destroy her son's world. It began on a humid summer night in the late 1980s at a Jamaican club in Brixton. The air was thick with smoke and lovers' rock, and there, among the crowd, she met Thomas Bernard, magnetic, with laughter that cut through the haze. For one brief summer, they were inseparable, two souls suspended in the magic of youth. But their worlds could never merge. Hers was East London grit. His heart belonged to Jamaica. When Susan discovered she was pregnant, fear closed in. She chose silence. When gossip surfaced, whispers about a summer fling with a black man, she denied everything, protecting herself and the child growing inside her. She married Vincent soon after, a kind man who never knew. He raised Elliot as his own, unaware the boy carried another man's blood. Years later, Thomas heard whispers of a mixed-race child. He believed the boy was his and tried to reach out, but the court stepped in. Susan, fearing disruption and stigma, filed for confidentiality. The paternity was sealed. For Elliot's protection, the ruling said, emotional harm, stability, secrecy won. Now, the past was unraveling. Guilt gnawed at Susan. The secret she had guarded so fiercely had become a wound too deep to heal. Back at the pub, low lamps cast shadows across Elliot and Amanda's faces. They sat close, the weight of their truth pressing down like London fog. The law was clear. In England, even half-siblings couldn't marry. Amanda sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap. It's illegal, she said. The words tasted like ash, even if we didn't know. The law doesn't care. Elliot didn't speak. He nodded, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the floor. The ruling was final. No appeal. But something in them refused to break. What we have is still real, Elliot said quietly. They didn't live what we lived. They didn't raise Jordan. They don't know. Silence. Then voice low but firm, Elliot added, I'm going to challenge this. The law kept me in the dark. It put us here. I want to fight for us, for Jordan. Amanda nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. She wiped them away, her eyes burning with resolve. We'll need support. It won't be easy, she said, but we have to tell the truth, even if it breaks everything. They sat in heavy silence, aware of how much was at stake. The world outside wouldn't understand, but within these four walls they made a pact. For now, they'd keep their story private. When the time was right, they would speak. Together, they would fight for recognition, for the family they had built, for a love that had endured against all odds. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, Thomas opened his eyes to a world of pale fluorescent light. His body ached, but the weight in his chest was heavier. He lay still. The hum of machines and distant footsteps filled the silence. Regret settled in. Regret for lost years, for not being there, for the pain his absence caused. He thought of Elliot and Amanda, and the shocking truth. He stared at the ceiling, haunted by the past. He had failed his children, not out of cruelty, but through absence. Blood connects, but only presence earns love. Will they hate me? He wondered. Can they ever forgive me? Still, beneath the fear, hope stirred. Healing may be possible. Maybe something new could grow from the wreckage. That evening, Thomas's sister called. Her voice, warm and steady, reassured Elliot and Amanda. Thomas was recovering. For the first time in years, peace brushed Thomas's soul. The road ahead would be hard, but now it felt possible to walk it. Together, days later, as spring blossomed over London's parks and the city breathed new life into its streets, Elliot and Amanda stood side by side outside the house of Thomas's sister. They had come not just to visit, but to confront the secrecy and silence that had cost them their innocence, their peace, and the simple certainty of who they were. With the support of friends, family, and a small but growing community who believed in their truth, they were ready to face Thomas, not as victims of a hidden past, but as warriors determined to rewrite the story that had trapped them. No longer shadows lost in the fog of secrecy, but light, fierce, undeniable, and wholly theirs. The living room was thick with silence as Elliot and Amanda stepped inside, side by side, hands entwined, their faces set with quiet resolve. They were survivors of negligence, secrets kept, truths buried, selfish ambitions prioritized above family. They had fallen in love, unaware of the blood ties that connected them, victims of a system that had let them both down. Thomas eased into the recliner, his bottom lip slack, his gaze steady, but burdened with regret. Elliot broke the silence with quiet intensity. Thomas, I don't want to break your heart. I want the truth. I want to understand your reality. Our love is real. Our family is real. But secrecy has kept us in the dark from the start. Our love is more than biology now. For the first time in days, Thomas spoke. His voice was rough but sincere. I was young, partying, chasing pleasure. That's how I met your mothers. None of you were mistakes or unwanted. But I wasn't ready. Not ready to be a father. I wasn't looking to settle down. All I wanted was more fun, more women. He paused, the weight of his confession heavy in the room. I was an unprincipled womanizer. Elliot and Amanda listened without interruption, the raw truth settling over them. I was carefree, Thomas continued, voice softer now. I lost contact with your mothers. By the time I realized what I'd lost, they were gone. I searched, asked around, but no answers. Eventually, I returned to Jamaica, thinking it was too late. A bitter smile tugged at his lips. Funny enough, he said quietly, of all the women I was with, you two are the only children I have. I never expected to be a father. And now, this feels like a cosmic punishment. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Amanda reached out, gently grasping his hand. Feeling the sincerity in his pain, Elliot's eyes softened, empathy blooming amidst the hurt. In that moment, the walls built by years of silence began to crumble, replaced by fragile hope. Behind closed doors, not everyone was kind. Susan wrestled with a heavy cloud of guilt, weighed down not only by the secret she had kept, but also by the whispers and judgments of the community around her. Her relationship with Elliot, once distant and strained, now hangs by a thread, fragile yet gradually mending through shared pain and reluctant understanding. Amanda's family, traditional and protective, found it hard to accept the truth. The shock tested their bonds, but through the chaos, her grandparents and younger brother stayed by her side, a quiet, steady anchor. With a gentle, unwavering voice, her brother said, "You'll always be my sister." And Jordan, their little boy, innocent and bright, became the beacon of hope that kept them grounded. His laughter, his touch, reminded them that family was more than biology or law. The law was clear and unyielding. Marriage between siblings, even half-siblings, was forbidden. It was a harsh truth Elliot and Amanda accepted with quiet dignity. Outside the courthouse, after the final ruling, Elliot wrapped an arm around Amanda's shoulders and said softly, "We will remain a family. We'll find our own way, no matter what." They weren't naive. The world would not always be kind, but they chose to live honestly, even if quietly. Amid heartbreak and shattered expectations, they chose love, unapologetically, fiercely, and without regret. The evening sky over London was bruised with shades of purple and gray, the city holding its breath as Elliot and Amanda stood on the steps of a quiet chapel, far from the grandeur and expectation of the wedding that never was. They weren't bound by law or tradition anymore, but by something far deeper. Jordan, clutching his mother's hand, looked up at them with innocent eyes, full of trust. In that moment, all the confusion, the heartbreak, and the scandal faded away. Elliot took Amanda's hand, their fingers lacing naturally, a silent vow passing between them. "We may not have a marriage certificate," Elliot said, voice thick with emotion, "but we have each other. We have Jordan, and that's enough." Amanda smiled, tears tracing delicate rivers down her cheeks. "We write our own story now, just us. No shame, just the truth." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft golden light over the city's rooftops, Elliot and Amanda embraced, two souls entwined not just by blood, but by a love fierce enough to defy everything. In a world that sought to break them, they chose to be whole, and in that choice, they found freedom. Days later, spring had fully arrived in London. The city was alive again, with blooming cherry blossoms and the soft hum of life moving forward. Elliot, Amanda, and little Jordan sat together in a quiet park, sunlight filtering gently through the canopy of pink and white petals above them. Around them, the world carried on, indifferent, but full of possibility. Amanda leaned down to brush a cherry blossom from Jordan's hair. He giggled, chasing a butterfly across the grass. Elliot watched her, hand warm against hers. They didn't need papers or permission, just this. Laughter, sky breath shared under the soft hush of spring. They had weathered storms no family should face, and yet here they were, bound not by law, but by choice, by resilience, and by love. Thomas had returned to Jamaica, but the ties remained fragile, yet mended. Susan and Elliot were rebuilding their fractured past, step by careful step. Elliot leaned close to Amanda, his voice soft but steady. "We're not defined by what's forbidden. We're defined by what we create, together." Amanda nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Our story isn't conventional, but it's ours, and that makes it beautiful." As the sun dipped low, casting a warm golden glow over the park, Jordan's laughter echoed, a promise of hope, renewal, and the unbreakable strength of family. They had survived the truth. Now, they would learn how to live with it. They chose love over shame, because a parent's legacy lies not only in blood, but in presence. Abandoning a child leaves wounds no secret can heal. Blood carries a magnetic pull, one that can bind relatives in unexpected and sometimes dangerous ways. And when the truth is hidden and young people grow up unaware, the blame does not rest on them. It rests with those who chose silence over truth. Adults must ensure that children know where they come from, so they can grow without confusion and never unknowingly blur the lines written in blood. If you enjoyed the story, show some love, like, comment, and subscribe to Word, Sound, and Story, where Troy McKenzie transforms real-life experiences into meaningful, dramatic, and entertaining tales.